Welcome to the Brand Doctor Podcast, strategies that help entrepreneurs build reputable and profitable brands. Here's your host, Henry Kaminski Jr.
So what is going on, everybody? I am super excited to do another Brand Doctor Podcast episode for you guys today. I have an amazing guest on the show, and it was literally coincidence that we've met. And I told you guys, every year I try to pick a charity of choice. And last year we did United Dog Rescue. We had a lot of fun down there in Fort Lauderdale. And this year I wanted to find a charity that was close to my heart, something that really I was passionate about, and something that was more personal. I mean, I love dogs, and we have Canelo over here that's always hanging out. But I wanted something that was going to make a little bit more of a deeper impact. And so I was up late one night on a Saturday, and I was Googling charities that helped the sexually abused. And for some of you guys that may or may not know this, I didn't really talk about this for many years, and I'm 37 years old, and I just, with all the shit that's going on in the world today and the end of 2017, I said it's time to sort of come out and talk about this and shed light on it, because when I came out and talked about this for the first time publicly, I did not realize how many other people out there that this happened to. And when I was 10 years old, I was sexually abused by one of my mom's friend's sons. And to this day, it's always been something that I've buried in my life for many years, because it's just a dark moment in my life. And back then, I didn't even know what the fuck was going on. I thought it was like a game, because that's how it was presented to me, until I grew up and realized what the hell was going on and how wrong it was. And I remember the day going to my mother saying, "This is what's going on." And I remember being brushed off like I wasn't telling the truth. And then it took 3 more times for my mom to even get the balls to talk to her friend about what was going on. And so now I have a son who's 5.5 months old, and I feel like a lot of this has come back, and it's been amplified now, because God forbid that ever happens to him. And so I was up late on a Saturday night, and I was Googling, and I found this website, and it was called A Voice for the Innocent. And I spent a good hour on the site looking at his social media platforms and reading the story of the founder. And it was very touching, and I was connected with it. And I just donation right off the bat. I just said, let's go. Let's go. And so I reached out to Jamie via email, and I just let him know that he was chosen as the charity of choice for Unique Designz in 2018. And we connected, and it's just a beautiful organization. So without further ado, I want to introduce Jamie Jamie Cyrus. I knew I was going to mess it up. Jamie Cyrus, who is the founder of A Voice for the Innocent. What's going on, Jamie?
Hey, Henry. Thank you so much for having me. I always tell people it's like Miley's last name, but with a V in the middle. You know, that usually helps it stick with them. So I mean, thank you for having me. Thank you for speaking so passionately about what you experienced and so, raw. And I think, in so many ways, that is what this organization is based on, is helping people be able to tell their story. And because what we know is that in order, if somebody feels like they need to find help, they want to talk to a counselor, whatever that might look like for them, the first step of that is telling the story, and for so many people, it can be hard to tell the story out loud. It can be hard to say it out loud. And so we wanted, and I can get into that, but we created that anonymous platform where one, you don't have to say it yet. You can type it, you can submit it, and it's not something you have to, you have to hear yourself say right now. And I think that helps a lot of people. So just thank you for, on behalf of so many people, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men who experience something like what you mentioned, something like I experienced. Thank you for just speaking about it.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. And so I want to get into sort of how you created A Voice for the Innocent from the ground up, and what was the passion behind it. And if you don't mind sharing your story,
sure.
I want my audience to hear and know what all goes into and how this charity got formed in the first place.
Sure. So I usually start kind of far back. I was raised by a single mother, and I was her only child. So it was always just, me and her. And for the first several years of my life, probably 5 or 6 years, maybe even up to 8 years, I'd met my dad, just a handful of times. They were never together. They were dated and then decided to call it quits before I was even born. And I met him, a couple times, just as a very, very young kid, but it wasn't anything consistent. And so as I was growing up, I was always asking my mom where my dad was. And her answer to me was just always, your dad loves you very much, but he just doesn't quite know how to be a dad, or he's not ready to be a dad. So I was always fine with that answer. For years, I was fine with it. And, it was just kind of like, okay, well, that's just how it is. But I started noticing, I started feeling at least like all the people in my life, their dad was present, or a stepdad or mom's boyfriend or somebody. And I know obviously like the rates of single mothers in our country don't necessarily back up my claim. However, it felt like in my life, every friend of mine had a dad and I didn't, and not to mention they typically also had siblings. So I started feeling as a kid like my household was different. And I loved my mom. I had no complaint. I still, my mom's the greatest person I know, but I didn't have any problems necessarily with how my family structure was, but it just felt it was so small. It was just me and her, and everyone else had dad and siblings and whatever else. And I always used to ask my mom too, like, am I ever going to have any brothers or sisters? And she said, Jamie, you have to at least be dating somebody for that to happen. My mom pretty much, she's been single my whole life and is always just focused on being a mom. And so at one point, I guess I was probably around 8 or 9 years old. My grandma ended up running into my dad at a department store. And, obviously, goes without saying, this is far before Facebook, social media, or the internet. So, and my mom had an unlisted number in the phone book. So that was he just couldn't find us. And he told her he'd been trying to, but wanted to be a part of my life, but couldn't find where we were. And so my grandma took his number, gave it to my mom, and she called him and they talked for several hours, and it was a conversation that was about, hey, if you are going to be a part of his life, then you show up for birthdays. And if you make plans with him, you don't cancel them. And, he's getting to the age where if you're inconsistent, then that's really going to hurt him and everything. And he agreed. And so she told me, and I remember, I think back to little childhood Jamie, and I kind of feel sad for him for this moment because she said, guess who I talked to yesterday? And I guessed my dad right away. And she said, yes. And I said, oh, does that mean he's ready to be a dad? And, what an innocent little question, but I think back like, just how excited I was. And I also learned he was married and they were expecting my little sister. So it was like a double surprise, and so we went and met and ended up meeting my little sister. They were it was very close to my stepmom's due date and everything. So I ended up meeting her, obviously. And year later, they had a little brother, and, I started seeing him more and more, and I'd go over there on, maybe once a month, spend a night, still see him throughout that month or whatever. And over time, that turned into the every other weekend kind of situation that so many children of single parents, come to know. So I was going over there every other weekend, and we had this paper route, and it's a very thankless job, 7 days a week, no days off. You get up at 1 a.m. and you go to this huge warehouse and you assemble the papers and put them in the bags and throw them. We'd throw them in the back of his Ford Windstar or Dodge Caravan, whatever he had, and go deliver the papers. And it took several hours a night. And on the weekends that I was there, I'd go with him. So we'd go do this thing at 1 a.m. We'd drive around. He would always stop at the same BP station and get himself a coffee. He'd get me a French vanilla cappuccino, and we'd turn on 90s country music like Alan Jackson and Garth Brooks, stuff like that. And this is just what our soundtrack was for the night. And we'd drive around, and it was the same thing every time. And he'd let me throw the paper out at certain houses and everything. And what kid doesn't want to throw anything out a window anyway? So it was great for me. We had this whole routine, and when we would get home, the routine started to turn more sinister because the rest of the house was still asleep. And during these hours, he started showing me pornography and sexually abusing me. And this went on for, it escalated and got worse. The whole thing lasted about 3 years. At this part in my story, I usually bring this up because I think it's important. I was a very educated kid, specifically around sexual issues. My mom was very upfront. We called body parts the body parts they were. She got me, books for adolescents that talked about puberty and talked about growing up and had definitions and body part and anatomy. And I knew all this stuff. I knew what sexual abuse was and rape and harassment. I knew all these things as a kid. At least I had the definition of them. But I didn't recognize my own situation for what it was. And that's not my fault. I was a kid, but I just couldn't identify it. That was its own definition, and my story was its own thing. And I know that you had talked about it being presented to you as a game almost. For mine wasn't looked at as a game. It was looked at as our secret, and I didn't even ever dream of telling anybody, not because of any other reason than I thought I would get in trouble. My mom, for all of the, for as open as she was about pretty much every topic there was, she was pretty strict about a lot of things. I wasn't even allowed to watch The Simpsons growing up, so, she just didn't like me watching certain things. So certainly I'd get in trouble if she found out I was watching pornography every other weekend, so this was just, and that's not obviously her fault or my fault. It's just, I thought I'd be in trouble. So I didn't say anything. And after about 3 years, excuse me, what I'm told, I don't necessarily remember this, but my mom tells me that, I would start to try and make plans on the weekend that I was going to my dad's, I've got this school event, or I've got this or that, I can't go to my dad's. I don't remember specifically doing that, but there are parts of my story I don't remember too clearly. But she just assumed that I was becoming a young teenager. I was in middle school, and, he's just trying to fill up his weekends. He's starting to get a little more freedom, whatever. So, at one point, the abuse escalated to a point that I just kind of made up my mind that I couldn't go back there. I don't know if I was getting older and just recognized it, or if I was just made to be so uncomfortable that I knew no matter what, even if I got in trouble, okay, I just don't want to go back. And so we had moved out of the district where I lived. And so it was a Friday, and I had a best friend, and I walked to his house after school. And my mom had said, go to his house and call your dad, make arrangements for me to either drop you off or him to pick you up. And I'll be there to pick you up, at whatever time, and then I'll take you to your dad's or whatever. And so we were walking home, and he was the first person I ever told. And I was basically like, hey, I'm supposed to call my dad. Don't let me. Like, literally beat me up if I try to call him. And he said, why? And I told him, and I think I told him very frankly, but here he is, another 8th grader. What's he supposed to do? It's not that he was educated enough to do anything. And so he just pretty much said, okay, I won't let you call him. And so we went to his house for several hours. I didn't call my dad, and then my mom came to pick me up, and she said, did you call your dad? What are we doing? And I said, I didn't call him, but I'll tell you why in the car. She said, okay. And we go into the car, and I basically just said, I don't want to go to dad's anymore because he's touching me and making me watch pornography. And her response was, do you mean he's been sexually abusing you? And it was in that moment that definition that I knew attached itself to my experience. And I was like, oh shit. Like, I guess that is what it is. Yeah. And, she cried, and she told me it wasn't my fault. She told me I never had to go back there. Told me she loved me and that she was proud of me for telling her, which, like I said, I thought I was going to be in trouble. And that wasn't the experience at all. She went home. I always like to describe my mom. She's about 4'10". She has lost some weight in the last years, but at that time especially, she was about as round as she was tall, and I always describe her kind of like Mrs. Claus. She loves Christmas. I love Christmas. It's just my favorite time of year. It's because of how I grew up. Christmas sometimes seemed to last from November till May in our house. She's just a jolly, loving person. She doesn't have anything bad to say about anyone. If I told her that I was doing a podcast with you, even though she's never met you or likely heard of you, she'd say, well, invite him over for Thanksgiving or, whatever, Be like, well, Mom, he's up in Jersey. And she'd be like, well, if he comes down, he's got a place to eat dinner. She's just that kind of person. Everyone loves my mom. And that day, she became the fiercest, most badass woman that existed. And we got home, and she called my dad and just screamed at him and basically laid out all these ultimatums. And she said, you have 24 hours to decide whether or not you tell your wife or I tell your wife. And I guess he opted to do that. Then she said, and I'm putting him in counseling immediately, and they're going to need to tell the police. So we'll be seeing you in court. And I don't really give him credit for anything, but if I were to give him credit for anything, it would be he did not try to deny it. He didn't try to fight it, and he didn't say, please don't do that. He kind of accepted, what he had done and that. And throughout that whole time after, it was such an odd year for me. So this was at the end of 8th grade. And I had said we moved out of district, and I was finishing up my school year at the district I'd always been in, but we actually lived about 20 minutes away. So I was going to be starting a new school for high school. And, so here we are in this new neighborhood. I didn't know anybody. I didn't necessarily have any support of people my age that maybe wouldn't have even known what I went through, but I just, didn't get to necessarily see my friends the way I used to. And I just remember that whole summer, how hard she worked to make sure that any of my friends from my old city got to come up to our house, even if she had to pick them up. And she'd have movie nights and game nights and sleepovers. And, she built a support system of people that were from church or from our family and group of friends, and made sure that I had, men to show me more of a positive role model, even if it was just, her brothers or brother-in-law or something like that. She was making sure that men were spending time with me and showing me that, just being a positive male role model for me. And any decision that was able to be made by me, she let me make it with no questions. And a lot of that we did have to go to court. So if I didn't have to be there at a court date, she would leave it up to me, and I remember the court date for the sentencing, I had always said I didn't want to go. And the morning of, I guess I woke up and decided I did want to. So she canceled all of her plans that day and made sure I was able to get down there. And the whole time, making sure I knew how loved I was by her, by other people, making sure that her and other people were telling me in their own ways that what happened wasn't my fault, that that's not the way it's supposed to be. And that I'm not a different person because of what happened. And, as a kid, a lot of times, especially during high school, it'd be like, Mom, like, I get it, like, I understand, but I know what she was doing it. And I think that it was effective because I was able to walk away feeling like I didn't do anything. I was able to walk away knowing that I didn't do anything wrong. And certainly it's the abuse that I went through has shown itself in, relationships, my inability to trust sometimes. It's shown itself in anger problems and in things that I've dealt with. But because of how she responded, I always had a solid ground to stand on when dealing with those issues. And so I would always talk about my story. I talked about it in high school, the time that I was in college, and I'm a musician. That's what I always did. I was always gonna be a famous musician or whatever. And so I would play in so many bands, and I know I sent you the recording of one of them based on one of your previous clients, and we had a lot of fun, and we would travel around and play music, and never made it big or anything. But the last band I was in saw a little bit of regional success, but I was always very upfront about my story and about I wrote songs about it, and talked about it, and people started telling me their stories back in high school. Even people just told me their stories after I told mine, and a lot of times they had an experience more like you did, where they weren't believed by a parent, or a lot of times they were saying, I didn't even tell my parents. I, didn't know who to tell, or they didn't necessarily even recognize it was something they should tell, and until it was long done with, and now they were telling me, and the thing that so many people said was you're the first person I've ever told this to. Mm-hmm. And I started to recognize not only what a big issue this was, but I started to recognize how small it seemed the possibilities of a positive response were for so many people. I was just, I didn't really think at that time, I need to do anything. I didn't really quite get it. And so I was playing in a band, and we were out in Illinois playing this music festival. And it was like nighttime, and one of the headliners were playing. It's this huge stage, and it's at the bottom of this big hill. And I'm sitting there just getting ready to watch this headliner, and they invite this guy to come out. And turns out his name was Jamie Twerkowski, and he founded an organization out of Florida called To Write Love on Our Arms. And they help people who struggle with anxiety, depression, substance abuse, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, things like that. That's kind of their wheelhouse. And so he comes out before this band plays, and he spoke for like 3 to 5 minutes just about their services, about, if you're feeling this, you're not alone. If you have a loved one going through this, here's how to support them. Just very basic stuff. But he's speaking to hundreds, probably thousands of people at this thing. And I thought, God, what a cool resource. I've never dealt with clinical depression. I'm not a typically anxious person. A lot of those issues don't necessarily apply to me, but how cool would that be for the people here that it probably did affect, And I thought somebody should do that for sex abuse, and that was it. It wasn't going to be me, and over time, and I don't necessarily know what my thoughts are regarding, religion, spirituality, or whatever, or God, but that idea sat in my brain. And over time, it turned into, not somebody needs to do something about this. You need to do something about this. And I sitting there like, come on, brain, I'm going to be a famous musician. And, and brain's like, I think you might have something different in your path. And so the last band that I was playing with, I always said, I'm just too busy. Running a band you're really busy with promotion and shows and travel and practice and all that. And I don't have time. And plus I don't know how to start a nonprofit. And I knew I wanted it to be a website where people could anonymously share stories. I didn't know how to build a website. I didn't know anyone that knew how to build a website. So, I had the idea in 2009. I made a MySpace page for it and a Twitter account for it, but then I did nothing else. I didn't know what else to do, So I continued playing music. had this idea in the back of my head. And in that couple of years, I met a guy named Eric, who was a friend of a bandmate of mine. And I don't know why. I don't typically like to ask people directly for big things. I might ask you for a drink of water, but to dedicate your life to something is definitely not something I go ask someone for. But I'd met Eric a time or two, found out he was a web developer, and I just said, "Hey man, I got this idea. Would you like to, will you build me a website?" And I didn't offer him money. He didn't ask for money. And I also didn't know what a big undertaking that was. In my head, I built websites for my bands in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I'm like, yeah, just go get an Angel Fire, set it up, a GeoCities, and we're done, Apparently it's a little bit more than that now. But so we sat down, and in my head, it's like, sure, I'll build you a website. It'll be up next week. Obviously, that's not the case, but I knew I wanted it to be an organization. So we started sitting down for probably about, a year, and he started saying things like, well, how do you want people to feel when they come to your site? I don't know. I want them to feel like they got a place to tell a story. And he's like, it's bigger than that, And so we decided that. And then he said, okay, so how do we represent that with color schemes and with this and that? And I was like, gosh, I've literally never thought about this. And so we went through so many different discussions around user experience and around branding and all this. And, by that time, the band that I was playing in, we just decided to kind of call it quits. So my last excuse of why I didn't have time to do this was gone, So it was one of these things like, all right, get off your ass. I guess we're doing it, And so I started researching how to form a nonprofit. I learned about board of directors. I learned about, what paperwork you have to file with the state, with the IRS. And I learned about how to keep track of donations and what we have to pay, and started attending board meetings of other nonprofits just to learn what they talked about and how to keep track of minutes and all this kind of stuff that was not at all what I planned to do, still necessarily isn't what I planned to do, but here I am in the middle of it. So we officially launched in 2012, and because of my music background, I knew all the venues, I knew all the bands locally, and so we were like, okay, we've got this site. How do we let people know about it? And it just made sense for us to turn back to that same music community that I just been a part of, and so we started setting up at shows, and we started reaching out to people there, and then we were like, well, let's not just stop at shows. What about comic conventions? Right. Our Pride Festival's going on this June. Can we be a part of that? Let's maybe get in the parade. Let's reach out to people in that community. And so it just turned into all these events where we were setting up, and really, especially due to our subject, sticking out like a sore thumb. You're walking through a comic convention and you're seeing toy shops and your favorite artist and your favorite actor and comic shops, and then a sex abuse support group. And it was really odd. But what we found is that so many people are affected by this issue that most people were always like, oh my God, I'm so glad this is here. And we also found that we were reaching so many of those people who had been hurt and didn't know there was anything for them. There's so many great resources in every single city, mine included, for people who've been hurt by sexual violence, but it's really hard for them for a variety of reasons to make themselves known to their community, So they kind of sit there and wait for people to find them. And we kind of were different than that. And so we started saying, hey, why don't we let people know about some of those places? So now on our website, we have a database of national resources where people can just go on and find what's in their neighborhood. So I think that brings us up to speed. And it just keeps,
I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a long-winded guy, so that's a pretty long narrative. I apologize. But it's, I think that whether on purpose or by accident, we have a pretty different approach to this issue. And I think that allows us to reach a group of people who don't typically respond or don't typically disclose sexual violence, and allows them to maybe, counselors are wonderful. And I've had counseling, and a lot of people have had a lot of really, really great work with counselors. But also a lot of people find counseling to be very intimidating and very clinical. And so maybe they're not quite ready for it yet, or maybe they don't feel like they're ever going to be ready for it. They still, in my opinion, deserve a place to talk and to vent and to talk with others who have been through something similar, and with people who have had a little bit of training on how to respond to this. So that's what we try and provide for people.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So there's so many different ways I could go and take this. I mean, what is the biggest message? What is the biggest, if you can speak to those folks out there that have been sexually abused in the past, what do you want to say to them?
We break it down to, when we're kind of training our volunteers who respond to the stories, our main message comes down to 3 points, and it's one: we believe you. Belief can often be hard to find in our society. We believe you. We're not there. We don't want to question your story. We want to believe what happened and work with you on that. We want to hear you. So you don't have to fill out big forms with us. You come and anonymously share your story, and that's it. And we're ready to talk with you after that. And I think the third point is, however you're feeling about whatever you went through, that's okay. There's no right way to heal. There's no right way to respond to things that happen. These are traumatic things we're talking about, and people respond differently. I know people who are angry, and rightly so. I know people who are sad and deal with depression because of it. I know people who want to make jokes about their own story because they feel like if they can use humor, they can get themselves through it. I've been that person, obviously I'm not walking around just joking about my situation, but sometimes I've done that as kind of a therapy with, close trusted friends or people. I'm not necessarily, I'm not defending, sexual assault jokes as a whole, certainly not, but sometimes people use humor. Sometimes people don't want to talk about it at all. They're very apathetic to the whole thing. They want to forget about it. That's okay too. And if that means that, I don't want to come share my story on your site because I don't want to think about it. That's okay. If you ever change your mind, we're there for you. Yeah. So that's what it comes down to. And I think I send this message, not only we help anyone of any gender, but specifically to men. For a lot of reasons, it's a very different experience that men have disclosing sexual abuse. And we're there for men too. I spoke at an event. There's an event called Take Back the Night, and it's in a lot of cities. It's kind of a rally. A lot of people get together. There's typically a march around the city. There's typically a candlelight vigil, and then some speakers, and then a platform for people to share their story publicly if they want to. And I spoke at one of those a couple years ago. And then this past year, we were just tabling at it. We were there to support, and we just had a table of our information. And a guy walked up, and he had a girl with him, and I'd never met him. And so we typically just say, "Are you familiar with A Voice for the Innocent?" That's our starting line at our table. And he said, "Oh yeah." And he pointed right at me, and he said, I heard you a few years ago talk here. And he said, it was the very first time I had ever heard a man talk about sexual abuse. And I just didn't know that it happened to men. I thought I was the only one. And, with the information so readily available, and everyone talks, especially now in the Me Too movement. Sexual violence is typically very, it's easy to get a lot of information on it. And yet it's such an isolating experience that people go through that even with all that, this gentleman thought he was the only guy, or one of very, very few guys. And he said, you talking were the first guy I'd ever heard talk about this and had gone through it. And I was ready to kill myself before that. Mm-hmm. And he said, because of that, because of hearing you speak, I went and found help. I went and got counseling. And he said, it had been 2 years since I had spoken, and this was this past year. And he said, because of that, I'm so happy to be back here. I'm so happy to support other people who have gone through it. I feel genuinely happy in my life. I married my best friend, who was the lady that he had walked up with. And that I didn't do anything. I literally just talked. I shared a story. Storytelling has power. Storytelling has power, not only for the person telling it, but for the people reading it. And that's what I believe. I believe that storytelling is healing, and it is a way to connect people. And so that's why that's our biggest priority, I think.
Yeah, is to get the story out there. And there's a lot, that ties in very, very well with branding in general, and how a big part of branding is telling your story and telling telling the story that you want to tell.
Yeah.
And understanding that, like, there's no right or wrong here. It's you. And people are going to connect with you, and people are going to either resonate with you or they're not going to resonate with you. And either way, it's okay.
Yeah.
And one of the things, and I'll share a little bit more with you because I promised I would on this call, is like, it took me 37 years to come out and tell somebody about this. I mean, I told my wife about it maybe 2 or 3 years ago when I was doing some mindset rework. And I was going to a therapist or a mindset coach, whatever you want to call them. I don't care. Sure. But it came out in one of the sessions, and I never told my wife about it. And I got the balls to tell her. And then all this shit came out on television, and I was just like, man, maybe this is I just felt not alone anymore. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I wasn't going to be judged, because that was my biggest thing. Oh, Henry was sexually abused.
Right.
Like, God, I want to, who knows? He's probably some nutcase inside, or like, who knows what that did to him mentally? You know what I mean? And so I thought about all of these things that weren't true. They weren't true.
Right.
But I thought about it, and I was like, oh, I can't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And not for nothing, I don't even know to this day. I was thinking about this the other day when I saw this interview coming up. I said, I don't even know if my father knows to this day, because I don't know if my mother ever told him, because I don't know what my father would have done
yeah.
to him and to, himself, and I just kept thinking, like, I have a 5.5-month-old son, and I don't know what I would do as a father if he came home one day and told me that somebody did that to him.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I honest to God don't know, because I just, as a dad, I look at life and look at this world through a way different lens. And I don't know how else to explain it to anybody else who isn't a parent. But it's I just said to myself, I need to get out there and share my story and let people know that they're not alone, and that, timing is everything. Mm-hmm. And for me, it just happened to be this year that the timing was right.
Yeah.
And I say to myself, I can't feel bad. I can't feel guilty about not telling people sooner, because who knows how many people more you could have helped. But I just say, well, this is the year. I found the right charity. I found the right people to do it with. And that's what I set out to do this year. And it was amazing, because when I sent my email out and told everybody on my email list of the charity of choice, and, a lot of my clients are on that list, and it was amazing to get the response that I got back. People came out of the woodwork, Jamie. They didn't go into detail.
Sure.
But all they said was, you're not alone. And that hit me. That hit me hard because I said, I'm not alone. And the only way to get through it is to get support, get help, get that story out. Because when you get that story out, at least for me, like I felt freed.
Yeah.
Right? I felt freed. And that's the only thing that I can do and say to myself is you just got to get it out there, and you never know who you're going to impact. You never know who you're going to help. Right? You just got to do it. Mm-hmm. And you're actually doing those people a disservice by keeping it in, because they're looking for somebody just like we were looking for somebody to connect with, right? Yeah. And so that's the point that I want to drive home here today is I want people to understand that it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's unfortunate that it happened, and you just have to live through it. And there was a podcast episode that I just did prior to you, Jamie, and Kelly Soto, who was my guest, she kept saying this one term over and over and over again. She kept saying, things happen for me. They don't happen to me. Mm-hmm. And as crazy as that sounds, that happened to me. That what was it? If I was 10, it was 1990. Like, that happened. I hate to say this, but it happened for a reason. And maybe it's the reason that I'm here talking to you today. Yeah. And having the influence and the following and the audience that I have to be able to help and spread this word out. So you guys can't see this, but I'm on Facebook Live. I'm on Instagram Live. This is going to be turned into a podcast. It's going to go on YouTube. I'm not letting any rock be unturned when it comes to getting the word out about sexual abuse and finding people help and support when it comes to it. And so I want to tell everybody that's out there that may not have told anybody their story yet that a voice for the innocent is a place to go. And I have your Instagram handle here on Instagram and on Facebook. It's, if you just type in search query, a voice for the innocent. And if you go online, and it's avfti.org, correct?
That's it.
And just go and check them out. And I invite you to support them, donate to them. Do it for me. Do it for the people out there that have been struggling with this their whole lives and became suicidal over it. Or you may know a friend, a family member, a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, that might have gone through a similar situation. Do it for them. Do it in their name. Because I'm doing this in my son's name. Because he needs to know this. And he needs to know it early. So he doesn't get duped into thinking it's some sort of sick game. And so, I got to take a second.
You said so many poignant things there. And when I think about what sharing that story can mean for somebody, I have a friend. He's from the Bronx. He lives in Ohio now. He actually kind of looks like you if every inch of you but your head were covered in tattoos. He's and he talks with a super thick, New York accent, and just this all around like badass dude. And you would, you wouldn't want to say a cross word to him. That's the kind of presence he has, and every other word out of his mouth is a cuss word. And I mean, he's great. He's a really funny guy, but he was a kid, and he now talks about sexual abuse. That's pretty much, he has a job that supports him going around speaking about this. So I don't mind sharing his story because he's so public about it. He was raped as a kid by a neighborhood kid. And he always talked about, his parents and family were not really supportive of him. They weren't there for him. And he just thought he was a bad kid. And he thought he deserved being hurt. And he just, we're talking 7 years old, 8 years old, and he just thought he was unlovable and a bad kid. And even if those weren't the way he phrased it in his head, that's just who he was. That's how he thought. And so he grew up and, got in, as you can imagine, just didn't have a great path. He was in trouble all the time, developed a drug addiction, I think developed an alcohol addiction, got in fights, went to jail for assault. I mean, he was in a tough spot. And he talked to, he never told anyone about what happened to him as a kid, and one of the time, I don't know if it was a therapist he was speaking to, or maybe someone who was, kind of a therapist for inmates or something like that, and was talking with him. And he was talking about whatever the surface level problems were that you could see, that, the fighting, the addictions, the low self-image, whatever, the anger. And I forget, he knows his name, but whoever therapist he was talking to said, "Look, Mike, I don't know what it is, but you've got something in your gut and you need to deal with that. And if you don't deal with that, these surface problems aren't going to go away, And I think he even said, "I will fuck you," and walked out, And it took him some time to really take that in and think like, okay. And so he ended up talking. And when he started talking about it, he started realizing like, that ain't my fault. That was some 7-year-old kid. That wasn't his fault. And, my parents, they weren't great for me, but that didn't mean I deserved that. And he started talking about all this. And then he started realizing that he had less of a temper to control. He had less anger, and don't hear me saying this is easy. You're right. I'm not saying this is an overnight fix. You tell your story and tomorrow all your problems are gone. That's not what I'm saying. He also put in the work. He put in the work and listened to what other people said and analyze, I feel my temper start to rise. Actively worked on I don't want to say suppressing that, but feeling the emotions without acting on them is what I'm saying. And he did a lot of work on himself, and now, he's happy. He's married. He's got 3 or 4 daughters, and he goes around and talks about this all the time. And he talks about this issue in such a candid way. He now runs marathons too. And I think he did this thing where he ran for 24 hours straight, he's nuts. He's nuts. Or at least ran/walked. He did a marathon, but it was all in the name. He raises money, gives it to the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. And I think about that all the time. And when I think about like the things that people deal with and are trying to overcome, everyone's trying to overcome something. Maybe it's smoking cigarettes. Maybe it's waking up late, poor diet, whatever it is, working out more. There's always things we're trying to overcome. But if we've got something that is still festering inside of us, whether it's sex abuse, it could be a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. Could be the death of somebody we love. But these underlying traumatic issues, dealing with them is scary and it's difficult. And a lot of times it's a lot easier to just not think about it and try to deal with the surface level stuff. But I'm here to say that sometimes, sometimes we have to dive in and deal with that thing in our core that is that's hurting us, and it's causing a lot of other issues. When we look at the numbers of people, and I unfortunately don't have the numbers memorized because I'm not great with numbers anyway, but I know that it's significant that the people that have dealt with sexual abuse or sexual assault far more likely to turn to drugs, far more likely to turn to alcohol, far more likely to suffer PTSD, suffer depression, and have suicidal thoughts. And it's none of those issues are easy on their own. But when they're being caused by something underlying like that, we got to tackle it.
You got to go to the root of things. You can't dress it over. You can't. And it's funny you bring this up because, tying this back into branding, you can't just make things pretty. Like when it comes to a beautiful website or a beautiful logo and all of that stuff, like you're just you're just glossing over. That is such a facade, and then you get to start to work with a business and they have a terrible customer experience. You have a terrible customer experience and there's all these, skeletons in the closet. Right. And so, just making this point, it doesn't necessarily like, I want to get my thought through. You got to go to the root. You got to go to the foundation. You got to go to the basement and clean it out if you want to get through or get to wherever you want to go. There was a lot of skeletons in my closet in the past that I just tried to tuck away for years. And it all kept coming back in different occasions, in different scenarios. I had a huge trust issue in my early 20s. And I think that was a big reason why I didn't get married until I was 30 and didn't have a real girlfriend until I was about 26, 27, because I had all these trusts, even in business, Jamie, where I wouldn't let people come too close to me because, and it could very well possibly stem from this traumatic incident in my life. Yeah. And what I thought was, if I can get out there and help other people through it, because I don't think you ever get over it, you get through it. And take my experience and impact or inspire or help someone else, it's very therapeutic to me, but at the same time it helps them, but then it also ultimately breaks you through.
Yeah.
And that's the only way I truly believe people get to living the most fulfilling lives is by addressing those things that have been festering for years and just letting them out. And when you let them out, it's like this whole new lease on life appears. And I can't tell you to do it because you won't. It's like you got to take that step. You got to make that happen. Nobody in your life is going to do it for you. And, the great point that therapist said is a lot of what my business coaches say. Like, no sales coach in the world, no social media coach in the world, branding coach, business coach is ever going to help you get to where you need to be or where you want to be if you don't handle the shit you need to handle first. And you know what that is, right? I'm just telling everybody who's watching and listening, you know what that is. And every day that goes by that you do not address it, that it gets bigger. I truly believe it. It's like a cancer. If you don't get it out when it's small and easily able to get out, it turns into a big mess. And then it's sometimes too late. And I never want to see that happen to anybody. I just don't.
Yeah.
Don't.
Yeah. To your point, I do want to say to your point, because you mentioned you don't get over it, you get through it, and I think that's true to an extent. But what I would also offer to go alongside that you don't get over it in the sense that you forget about it like you would maybe forget about other things. But I think you can definitely find genuine peace with it.
Okay.
And that's just what I think. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
I've been wronged in the past and I've already forgotten about them. I'm never going to forget about this. And by getting over, I think that's fair. I mean, my life is dedicated now to stopping this because I was affected by it. So in that way, I'm never gonna get over it and not care about this issue. But I have found peace with it. I am genuinely happy. I'm happy in my marriage. I'm happy in my job. I'm a genuinely happy guy. So I think that in the sense that I'm not carrying that pain around with me anymore, I think it's possible to get over it, and I just wanted to add that because I think there's genuine hope for survivors of sexual violence. I really do. I believe that. I've seen it, and I've watched it. You also talk about how your having a son changed perspectives for you, your perspective on things. And I've got a 14-year-old stepson. I've been with my wife around 8 years now, and so I met him when he was 6, and I've officially been in most of his life. I can say that. And he was a great kid, and it is interesting how kids change your perspective. It's due to him. I mean, every relationship that I was in took the same course. I'd get upset or we'd get in a fight and I'd break it off because I'm not dealing with this for whatever reason. And whether it's big or whether it's small, I'm done with it and I'm out. 2 days later, we'll be back together, but it created very toxic, unhealthy relationships that were never going to go anywhere because I would just throw in the towel anytime I got remotely upset. And when my wife and I decided that we were friends for about a year before we dated, when we decided we were going to start dating, we had this discussion and kind of said, we've both been in relationships where there's a breakup every month. And we said, we don't want to be that. So if we break up, that's it. We're broken up. We're not getting and we kind of made that pact. And so the very first time that I started to feel that that rising sense of nope, get out of this, for whatever reason. I don't remember even why it was there. But that sense of you got to throw in the towel. This isn't for you. Get out, move on with your life. I had this secondary thing I'd never experienced before because I'd never dated anyone that had a kid and I don't have any of my own. Had the secondary thing of what's that showing him? You know what I mean? What are you showing him if you just throw in the towel and leave now? And I was, so in a way, for me, having a kid, which I never thought I wanted kids, it was a big decision for me to date somebody with a kid. And so for me, having that change in perspective, yes, it does come in with I have to protect him from this stuff. And I feel that every day. I talk with him a lot about this issue and other issues. But it also made me better. It made me have to address that trust issue of you're going to have to learn to trust. You're going to have to learn to be in a relationship where sometimes you're upset, Yeah. And I think in turn, my wife and I are very happy, and I love spending time with her, and I'm very happy to be married. It's another thing I never thought I would do, but
yeah, me either.
Yeah. I just want to for anyone that may be listening or watching that isn't quite sure, I just want to stress I fully believe in hope. I fully believe that you can come to peace with this. You can find help. You can find support, and we're happy to be there for you. And it's anonymous. You don't have to tell us who you are. It's free. We're not going to charge you anything. We're not going to ask you for money.
Right.
And we're ready. We're ready to talk with you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, James, I didn't realize. He said, "How long should I, how long should I block out for this interview?" I said, just 30 minutes. We're breaking an hour.
Well, I asked that because originally I thought I might be staying at work to do it. And then in the last minute, I decided to drive home, which I live about 35 minutes from work. So I was a little bit late, but so now I'm fine now. I got to call at 5 with someone else, but we're nowhere close.
So we're going to wrap up, guys. Jamie, for those folks that are watching and listening, please share all of your social media platforms and handles, and tell them again what the website is.
Sure. Facebook, just search A Voice for the Innocent. We're there. Twitter and Instagram, it's just at AVFTI. Website is avfti.org, or avoicefortheinnocent.org works as well. We got videos on YouTube. Just search A Voice for the Innocent. You'll find us. And I'm sure we have Tumblr and everything else, but I'm not the one that operates that. But I know it exists.
Yeah. So I have Crystal on Facebook says, thanks guys for sharing your personal stories and how you guys have overcome this and become who you are. XOXO. Thank you, Crystal. We appreciate it.
Crystal.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So there you have it, guys. Another Brand Doctor podcast episode for you. I wanted to take a little time out. I tried to tie in some branding key points here in this episode, but the majority of the message is you're not alone. If this has happened to you in the past or is happening to you now, there is help, and Jamie's organization is there for you guys. And I fully endorse it 1 gazillion %. I've already met a few board members just by getting involved with them at the level that we are getting involved with them, and they just seem to be very genuine people that are just out there to get the voice out, to make a difference, and to just help. And so go, if you want to do me a solid today, go and give them a share, a like, a comment on any of the social media platforms that he just mentioned. Go follow them. And if you're really feeling daring, go and drop a donation on their website. It's a quick little donate button there. It takes 2 seconds. And make a difference in someone else's life today, because the monies that Jamie will raise all goes back to them. It's a 501c3 organization. So it's a charity organization that is just so passionate about this particular niche community. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this community needs more support at this point. And so there you have it, guys. Last but not least. So Jamie, I want to thank you. I can't forget to thank you for spending the time today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Can I throw in one more thing? Sure. Just for folks who are listening to this podcast, who like podcasts, I always forget to mention that we also do a podcast. It's not so much story based, but what we talk about is sexual assault kind of as a larger issue. So some of the topics we talk a lot about self-care, especially around the holidays. Maybe somebody's going home to their home where their abuser still is, and how do you take care of yourself through that time. We also might talk about, hey, my favorite football team that I've loved my entire life has a known abuser on their team. Can I still support that team? We talk about stuff like that. My favorite musician, my favorite actor now has allegations against them. What's that mean for my favorite movies, my favorite albums? We talk about that stuff because it's complicated and we don't necessarily always have all the answers, but we at least try to have the discussion. So that podcast is called More to the Story, and it is available on iTunes also, and any podcast listening platform.
That's awesome. So guys, go check that out too. I love the name, the more to the story. I absolutely love that name.
Thank you.
So Jamie, we're going to have you back on the show later on this year, and we're going to follow your journey this year, and I'm going to be right next to you and supporting you and your organization as much as I possibly can this year. Kristen Ebby and who I'm working with and my team's working with, and we're going to be handling all your print and all your design work this whole year, and who knows, forever. At this point, just keep up the great work. I love what you do. Thank you for sharing your story. And you're just impacting the world. You're making this world a different place. And that lines up with my values. And I'm with you 100%, bro.
Thanks, man. Thanks. Really appreciate you having me on and all your support.
You got it. There you have it, guys. Another episode in the books. Thanks again for watching, listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Brand Doctor Podcast with Henry Kaminski Jr. To get your appointment with the doctor, visit Brand Audit at www.uniquedesignz.net.